I have apologies to make. First of all, despite my enduring commitment to evidence-based criminology, I have absolutely no data for you this morning. Despite my very great commitment to communications technology, I have no PowerPoint presentation. So no numbers, no pictures. I've come armed only with thoughts, which I hope you'll find interesting. The good news is that I won't take very long. So, how do people develop their ideas about the criminal justice system? When I was pondering this in my office the other day, I thought of some research that my colleagues and I conducted a while back. I won't tell you which jurisdiction, but the research involved focus group discussions with primary school students. And one 6-year-old, when asked, "What do police do?" said, "Well, they beat up scruffy people and eat a lot of donuts." And I wonder where she developed those impressions, whether it was personal experience, having seen this, or having heard it from someone else, or having seen it on a cartoon show, or whatever. But people do often develop very strange impressions about institutions of criminal justice and what they're up to. One can learn personally. I've had personal experiences with law enforcement as a victim, as a bystander, as an offender. I must reveal to you that it was my offenses have been very, very minor. No jail time at all involved. Each of these occurrences was memorable, and I can almost recite them to you. They're too numerous to recite. But all of my interactions with police have left me with a favorable impression, both here in Australia and in the United States. My only unfavorable memories of police contact resulted from research engagements, but I won't dwell on that. Those too were memorable, but beside the point. Obviously, and it was touched upon here, that many people develop impressions of law enforcement and criminal justice based on official utterances, either from institutions themselves or from politicians. Those of you who are interested in that, I would commend the work of Don Weatherburn, who wrote a book about law and order in Australia, published by Federation Press sometime 5 or 6 years ago, I think. I think it's hard to beat as far as a fix on that issue is concerned. And then, of course, there's media coverage, and we discussed media coverage just a while ago. There's traditional news media. There's fictional media depictions of criminal justice, which are often quite fantastic in nature. And then there's a combination of the two, infotainment or fiction masked as news and so on. Russell Smith dwelt upon some of this when he suggested, in other words, that good news is no news. I prefer the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads, as far as news coverage is concerned. But to appreciate media coverage or news media coverage of crime and criminal justice, you have to understand the various goals of media organizations. The news media exist to do more than simply inform their readers, listeners, or viewers. This is certainly one aspect, but there is much more. Media organizations are business organizations. They exist to make money, whether it's through advertising or through government appropriations in the case of public broadcasters. To do this, media also engage in a degree of entertainment. Even what purports to be news coverage is often entertaining, something that attracts attention, And so often on Sunday nights when you're listening even to the ABC, you hear about significant motor vehicle accidents or drive-by shootings, even if they occur on the other side of Australia. But that's the illustration of if it bleeds, it leads. In a sense, the media also engage in what might be called a morality play. They tend to caricature good and evil. And obviously, crime provides them with lots of raw material from which to characterize evil. This is appealing to many people who like to feel good about themselves and about the people they live with, and for them to identify those who are very different and very unpleasant makes them, by comparison, look and feel good. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the news media are often used as a political instrument, either by elected officials or by institutions of criminal justice themselves, either in the former case to enhance electoral appeal, in the latter case to enhance appropriations. And in the 30 or 40 years since the fiscal crisis of the state descended upon us, this has become reality. Now, one interesting thing about media, and very recently, is the diversification and democratization of media. In the old days, it was said freedom of the press belongs to the man who owns one, or now you could say to the woman who owns one. But now, freedom of the press belongs to almost anybody with digital technology. If you've got a Twitter account, which I happen not to have, you're a publisher. The institution of YouTube allows people to capture reality or the appearances of reality and broadcast it to the world. Many of you would remember quite some time ago now the terrible beating sustained by a gentleman named Rodney King at the hands of the Los Angeles police. Hands up anybody who hasn't seen those images. These were published around the world before the dawn of the digital age. Nowadays, with a cell phone and a YouTube connection, you can publish vision like that yourself. This, I think, has profound implications for public impressions of the operation of criminal justice, even if there's a vulnerability for some content to be taken out of context. I think it's a very interesting development in people's perception of institutions of criminal justice as they operate. Another thing about the new media, if I could call it that, social media or emerging trends in media, is the ability for people to tune in what they seek and to tune out what they don't seek. So you might find the unfortunate consequence of increasing tunnel vision on the part of some media consumers. A great book written on this general phenomenon is entitled Republic.com by Cass Sunstein, professor at Harvard. This was some years ago now. He mused about how people will only see what they want to see. They won't be subject to dissonant information, and it will make meetings of the minds more difficult to achieve. I won't discuss issues of fairness and effectiveness. They've been covered by our previous speakers, but can only commend the work of Tom Tyler to you in that regard. I just want to recapitulate what Russell Smith said about unrealistic perceptions of crime rates and rates of change in crime, and lead also into a brief discussion of unrealistic expectations of what criminal justice agencies can do. At least in Australia, the correctional system doesn't produce angels when offenders are released. And similarly, people have developed, I think, unrealistic expectations of what police can deliver. Now, to their great credit, the police have succeeded very significantly in selling themselves to the public. The vocabulary of reassurance has comforted many, but it has also induced an unrealistic expectation of what police can deliver. Police cannot be everywhere, cannot do everything, and cannot know everything. But we have kind of been persuaded that they can. And of course, when the crunch comes and you seek police assistance for something that they don't think is terribly significant, you might be left waiting a long time. That's unfortunate. The public has, I think, an unfortunate misunderstanding of what criminal justice agencies achieve by way of undesirable, unintended consequences. You think that, well, punish a prisoner, punish a criminal, and they will reform magically and become an upstanding, church-going, tax-paying citizen. That doesn't often happen. Sometimes they become defiant and rebellious, even to a greater extent than they were before entering the criminal justice system. So you're in fact creating or reinforcing criminal inclinations. The theory of differential association is basically that one takes after one's peers in terms of what one does, has significant implications for corrections as well. For 200 years now, prisons have been described euphemistically as schools for crime. And I'm intrigued at the prospect of setting up special prisons for outlaw motorcycle gang members where they could only learn from each other and improve their game once they get back onto the streets. A very interesting observation made by the journalist Misha Glenny, who wrote about underground carters markets. And he described the incredible brilliance and sophistication of top-end electronic criminals. These people are often geniuses. Sometimes they get caught for one reason or another. There's, of course, on the part of the authorities, a lot of pressure to lock them up. Well, when you lock up a genius, high-end electronic criminal, there's always the possibility that they will find themselves in the company of very competent terrestrial organized criminals who are always looking to grow their business when they're released from custody. Glenny says that this is a marriage made in heaven, and it's something that authorities should think twice about. The suggestion being that these brilliant hackers should be given some opportunity to employ their skills for socially useful purposes rather than exposing them to the high-end criminal environment that one finds in prison. There's a failure to understand, I think, the opportunity costs of many criminal justice operations. I remember telling my minister when I worked in South Australia 35 years ago that it cost the taxpayer $50,000 a year to keep somebody locked up. That price, I'm sure, has increased since then. What can you buy with $50,000? Or $250,000, which 25 years ago was the cost of putting a police car on the streets 24/7 with 2 officers on board. Obviously, you know, they'd have shifts and so on. But and think back to another another domain of public policy, that is defense. We're getting revved up for a new defense policy statement fairly soon. The cost of a joint strike fighter or a new frigate, top of the end electronic frigate, astronomically expensive. What could you buy with that? What are you buying with that, and what could you buy with that? What are the opportunity costs of that massive investment in that kind of product? I'll close on a sobering note, and that is, despite the decades and volumes of writings by criminologists suggesting that prisons are not the best ways to invest taxpayers' money, a message seemed to have fallen on deaf ears until the fiscal crisis really began to bite. And one finds in California, for example, people being released from prison, not because of what criminologists have said, but because the state can't afford them anymore. Anyhow, those are my thoughts for this morning. Thanks very much.